Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Missouri, Director of Military and Veteran Services for A&M-Central Texas. It is my joy and pride to be with you today and our second mid-month Moto. Joining us today is my very good friend and dear colleague, Mr. Emmanuel Tamarez, forgive me, and my dear friend and colleague, Keisha Holman with Career and Professional Services. So at this time, Manny, if you could, please tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, my name is Emmanuel Tamarez. I am a veteran. I was a full reserver, field artillery, 13 Fox. From To slow down a bit, I am originally from New York City. I joined the Army at the age of 21 after discovering that college was not really my thing at the time.
Interesting.
I treated college kind of like I did high school. I stayed in the cafeteria playing spades
I like
and,
spades.
and not going to class. And so then, I had a girlfriend at the time that then became my wife. And that kind of shocked the system because it was like, what am I going to do now? My original path for college was to go to college to go become a lawyer. And that wasn't really working out in the reflection of my grades. So then, what am I going to do? Right? I just took on a responsibility, created a family, and so then I joined the Army, um, and which was quite a culture shock for me in that when you grow up in New York, a lot of times you become closed in that becomes your universe, right?
Mhm.
And so, out of ignorance, I used to think that there was New York City,
Sure,
and then Washington D.C.,
sure.
and then if you go into Europe somewhere, right? And then we have like South America, right? And so there I was, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, talking to someone with a Southern tang, and asking them constantly to like repeat themselves because this northerner, as they would call me,
Sure.
was having issues with the English language. That's what they would tell me. Because, of course, they had it right and I was the one that had it wrong.
Sure.
And so I did an OSET, right? So essentially, that was when you don't leave for AIT and it's one complete process. So my drill sergeants were there to greet us the whole way through. So it was straight 4 months. And then I got assigned to Fort Hood, where I did my time um, in it when 4ID was still here, Aviation Brigade, as the fired and effects cell. And our main role kind of there was to deconflict airspace when we were deployed, and then whatever duties as assigned when we were here stateside. And so I did my time in the Army. In that time, I was, if people are old enough to remember, stop lost, right? Because we were leaving right back to Iraq right before I was due to get out. And so I was trying to, and Sergeant Major looked at me, he's like, nope, you're going. And so I was there. And then kind of blew out whatever plans I had because I was trying to plan out, like, I leave after my 4 years and, what path is ahead of me. And then when I got stop loss and I had to go redeploy, I had to rethink things because obviously my window got extended. And so then when you come back, literally 90 days. And that 90 days goes real fast in terms of trying to figure things out. And
So help me on. You had 90 days from the time you returned from deployment
get
until you
out
were leaving the
to
military.
ETSing out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you kind of speed rush through Army Transition Program.
Sure.
And it's like, we're pretty much just like checking boxes here to say that you kind of did these things. And then I was a civilian. I think the date was September 18th, 2009. Got my final packet and said goodbye to the installation. And in my time, in high school, I had a mentorship with Morgan Stanley, where I was doing kind of data entry for their options department. And so I had a crazy idea. It was like, hey, I want to get into the financial services field. And so went to Talton Satellite Campus, which was right across the street from CTC, when what grew out of and became A&M was literally one floor, and went to school. And during that time, kind of struggled with school. I didn't know that I had ADHD. I just thought, I get distracted real easily.
Sure.
And so kind of fumbled through, eventually graduated, and became a financial advisor, and worked really hard, and had built and carved out kind of my own business at that time, which eventually kind of led me to burnout. Because when you're in financial services, if you don't do enough pouring in, it could become a very lonely environment, because you're either selling something to somebody or having someone sell you something. And so it leaves very little room for actual relationships to form and so burned out. And then at the time, I had a big chip on my shoulder. I had a pretty big ego. And so I thought that I closed my business. I know a whole bunch of people in this community. I'm just going to get snap up like this. And I was unemployed for like 4 months. And my sister actually flew out to try to pull me back to New York City by ear or whatever forces she can use. And we actually argued for a straight week while she was here. Mm-hmm. But it was just what I needed to kind of pull myself together. And I was able to get a job in Bank of America. But during that time, I had to ask myself, like, what's my purpose? And I discovered in thinking of things that I got my greatest joy when I was a financial advisor, when people would tell me their dreams. Mm-hmm. and I felt that I was helping them fulfill that potential, right? And so remembering that, I asked myself, okay, what career aligns most closely with this? And in my search, I found that becoming a therapist really gave me that opportunity to do so. And so I figured out, okay, well, A&M at the time, they had a counseling program. And so I came here, right? And remember I said I kind of struggled. My GPA was like a 2.06. So I literally made it through. And so I come here all like, I'm going to do this. And I come here and they tell me, well, your last 60 hours need to be at a 3.0 or higher. And I was like, I felt so deflated and defeated. Had a moment in my car, and then kind of just, for lack of better, got a little angry and said, you know what? Even if I have to go back to CTC and get an associate in whatever to get my GPA high enough to be able to do this, I'm going to do whatever I needed to do to make it.
Right.
And by the grace of God, the next day, the university I ended up going to, Grand Canyon University, they called me, and still feeling dejected. I started throwing up all these objections, but you know that I have a very low GPA, right? Like I gave them every reason, and they were like, no, your first classes will be probationary, and then after that, you'll be just like everyone else, and you'll be able to continue through. And so it's remarkable when passion and purpose kind of align. For like the first year and a half, I maintained a 4.0 GPA, and then I kind of hit a wall. And because at the time I was taking 3 master's level courses, full time job, being and a single dad and just I couldn't even spell my name, and I got my first C, and I was like, oh my God! And then I realized that like I can still continue forward. Like they're still letting me take more classes. Oh my God, it's not the end of the world. And then eventually ended up graduating with a 3 point GPA, and then I started working in a homeless shelter, and it's always a little ironic and funny to me because homeless / domestic violence shelter, because I came from an experience being a financial advisor where you're surrounded by wealth,
Sure.
right? And now it's almost like God is asking me, hey, do you really want to do this, because this may be the rest of your life, right? And so I went from eating at really nice country clubs to walking in and talking to a person that just may have just slept under the bridge, and trying to figure out how to best help and serve them. And so I did my time there, and ended up being graced to have an opportunity to be the assistant director here. And now currently I work as a military family life counselor on the installation, and I'm an owner of a group private practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So we share some similarities in background. Not that I'm a New Yorker, but that we joined the service, and then along our way, we found some hiccups along the path. But then we also were able to translate that into a way to give back to others and give back to our communities, right? So through the lens of a veteran, have you had the opportunity to pour out from yourself and from all that has been provided and given to you? Have you had an opportunity to work with veterans in a mental health space or capacity?
Well, yes. So in my time in the working both in the domestic violence shelter and in the homeless shelter, unfortunately, we have currently homeless veterans, and we have veterans that are also survivors of domestic violence. And it's truly remarkable seeing the transformation of someone who, quite frankly, comes in with nothing, and through their efforts have the strength to build out and carve out a better life for themselves. And just being graced with the opportunity to be a part of that journey is more rewarding than I could actually give credit or name.
You were sharing with me earlier in the conversation of how you had a low point after you got out of the military.
Ah, yes.
And how did education pour into you finding that mission and objective for yourself?
So, in my journey here, I when I was coming to then Tarleton University, I like to label that term as my wandering through the wilderness, because I was still trying to carve out and figure out what structure really meant for me. And I had a newborn, and when I got out of the Army to stay at home, and be a dad. And so I was excited about being a stay-at-home parent while I went to school. And I discovered that I got a lot more than I was asking for. And so I now understand when young moms, they say they need adult time, because when you spend all day with a person that can't speak back, adult conversation becomes very valuable to you. And so, and during that time, in trying to figure things out, we had a student service organization called Central Texas Student Veterans Association that I became involved with, because I think it's very important to, if not find your community, build your own, because it allows you to be around others that share a common experience, and in that there's some built-in empathy, and it doesn't suck as much when you're in a group, right? Because you can kind of lean on each other's experience and help each other out, and maybe what you're weak at, someone else is strong, and what you're strong in, someone else is weak at, and it kind of raised the tide coming in, raises all boats, so to speak, and you're able to help each other out. And that probably be the only Navy acronym I give. So in seeking mental health, there's a lot of built-in shame and questioning of oneself, because no one ever wants to admit the demons that they're struggling with. And vulnerability is not always looked at as something powerful or a strength. And so, both culturally and through the military, you're always taught, at least in my situation, suck it up. We ain't got time. We got to make whatever mission happen. We'll deal with that later.
Sure.
And you deal with that later. And what you're doing is you're loading up your virtual kind of rucksack with all this weight. And sooner or later, that weight becomes unbearable. And then it's hard to move. And being able to find someone to help you unload is invaluable. And so during that time, going to counseling through the VA, I was very fortunate to have some very caring counselors that helped me navigate and take those bricks out of that backpack to kind of get my footing and not carry such a heavy load. But it kind of turned on a light bulb, later when I was thinking about becoming a counselor. Is like, because when you see someone do the job and that looks like you, it suddenly becomes more of a reality.
Right.
And so, but that time when I was getting my first degree, I was lost. And it took a lot of time and a lot of effort for me to find things that would later on make me help me accomplish what I was going after.
Sure. So, did you discover wellness practices while you were in college?
I did more in how can I say this? What I discovered, I didn't know the name of when I was in my bachelor's program.
Okay.
All right, because finding your community, finding your tribe, I was just like, okay, I'm hanging out with this group of people that kind of get me, right? It didn't really have a term. I was just, doing the things or going through the motions. And so when I went for my master's, that's when I was like able to give it a name, right? Terms like structure, scheduling, time hacking, mental load, right? I did not know that I was doing those things, or those things had a name. It was just, if I want to be able to pass the class, these are just some of the things that I had to do. And I was always the kid that had a lot of, you know, Manny is smart, but he's just lazy, or Manny is smart, but he's too much of a clown. Little did I know that I had ADHD. And so I discovered that through my daughter. She got tested, and then I was like, man, she's doing the same things I used to do as a kid. And so
Sure.
through her, I got the courage to get evaluated.
Okay.
And that was like a big, big, big light bulb moment in my life, um, that I discovered, like when I was in my master's program, um, in terms of like giving stuff a name, because I discovered that I learn differently, right? And so my way of memorization used to be like to sit down with a notebook and write things out 20,000 times and all the pages, right? And I would have the only luck of, if there wasn't a test, I can tell you about the subject completely. But the minute there was a test, I was a blank, right? And so giving it a name allowed me to figure out how to best deal with it, right? Because so often we go through things and we're fearing of the name of whatever we have, but when we don't get confirmation, then we don't know what it's going to take to deal with whatever challenges that come with it. And so figuring it out and being able to name it, and not just that, but taking away the shame of it. Because when my daughter was a lot younger, you would ask her and teach her the mantra of ADHD is your superpower. And I would have her, I had it so drilled into her, and, when she would hear it, she was like, "Yep, that's my superpower." Yep. And so it's able to take something that may not be looked at as such a positive thing, but allowing her to focus on the good parts of that.
Sure.
You know, the ability to be able to hyper focus, the ability to be able to respond in high tense situations. And so there's the good and the bad. And so how can we minimize the bad parts of it, but maximize the strengths of it, and putting yourself in positions to allow you to do that?
So again, like through the lens of a veteran soldier who is a therapist, have you come in contact with veterans in higher education who experience some of the same things you did?
Yeah. I was given grace and opportunity to be an assistant director here in TAM-UCT. And in that time, our biggest set of population is transitioning veterans. And so it was a great opportunity to be able to give back to people that were sitting in chairs just like me, right? And just this time around, I was able to give them an opportunity to speak about what's going on in their life, and then be able to validate their experience. Like, hey, no, this is normal. You're not going crazy. Like, it's okay, you know, for this transition to affect you in these ways, right? Because you take someone that was a high achiever in the military,
Right.
and they get that first disappointment in school.
Right.
Oh man, it's almost like the whole structure starts to collapse, and it's like, no, it's okay. This is you're learning a new skill set. You can't expect to have the same level of success when you're learning how to walk, right? Because these are new skills that you're developing, and now you out of the Army, there are new expectations on your life, right? Because when we're in the military, right, you become a husband, a father, and all these other things when you're not on the military's time, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And then it's military no longer around, right? It's almost like they give you back to your family, right? And now you're all these things. And so now, right, it's not like I have a deployment to go to that I have to get ready for. It's like, okay, I'm a dad now. I have to pick up the kids from school. I gotta make sure they have something for dinner. I gotta help with homework. And those are fair and reasonable expectations. And you have to answer them. And now you have to figure out how to manage things with all these competing expectations, plus the changes in your identity, right? Because now you're not whatever rank you held. You're not this important job. You're your dad that is figuring out how to not mess up the instructions on a box,
Yes, sir.
right? And and figuring out, okay, when do I do homework, right?
Sure.
How do I navigate difficulties with getting healthcare at the VA? Um, what what am I supposed to do with my life, right? And all of these things can leave people with a slew of emotions, from being angry to being sad, to frustration, and it's important for everyone in that encompasses that person to first, like, take a breath, right? Because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And whatever expectations in terms of time horizons that people may have, I would tell them to to not focus so much on that, because whether you do or you don't, a lot of times you find out that you don't have as much control over those things or not, right? And so, because you're relying on other factors that you cannot control,
Right.
and and to also remember at the same time that it's important for, even though the dynamic has changed, that we're all responsible for our own feelings, and that it's important to, as the family unit, to maybe reestablish what expectations are and reestablish what boundaries are going to be as they continue to do this thing called life, so that they can have safe spaces to be able to navigate the world, so to speak.
Sure. You managed and juggled all this while you were in college, or
Failure
fair?
is a very good friend of mine. I
Okay.
meet him quite often.
Okay.
But and then that's another thing. When I was going to school, that kind of helped me out a lot, and it's probably not very therapeutic, but I would tell myself very much, I'm too dumb to quit. And that whenever I would get disappointing news, or not be doing great in a particular class or a set of tasks that I had to do, I'm too dumb to quit. And that would kind of propel me forward. And then I always believed in failing forward, because at least if you fell and you fell forward, you're still a little closer than you would have been compared to falling backwards. And so, I would start my day with a couple of those sayings. I would have my own little mantras. I would write out, I still have it, my affirmations, followed by what I was grateful for. Before I started on my homework, I would have a little journal, and I would write all these things out. And then I would write out every day what I envisioned what my graduation would be from my master's program, to the T. Like I'm gonna walk across the stage, I'm gonna hear them say my name, and yeah, And,
Yes, sir.
and it happened.
Yes, sir.
And that was the most surprising part of it. Like, it was crazy enough of an idea that it actually happened. And yeah, so.
Manny, for synopsis, we've known each other for more than a year or so, 2 years and 5 months.
It's okay. We're getting old.
But just from a synopsis, I've heard you share how you've had ups and downs, how you've had starts and stops to your educational process, how you've changed career paths, how you have sought or pursued success, and then found that your path was detoured. What are some of the coping mechanisms or things that you've done to manage that? Because in every aspect of your success, there's been an additional aspect of education. But what other things have you done to help manage the stress and anxiety that you may have been experiencing while in college, and then also while you were pursuing the job campaign?
I think that you have to learn what fills your cup spiritually and what fills your cup physically. And the two always may not always be in the same bucket. And so I love to pour into people, but I know that takes a strain on me, right?
Sure.
I am very much, and I surprise a lot of people when I tell them this, I am an introvert, like a super introvert at heart. Like, the best way for someone to get me out of the house is not to say, "Hey, Manny, we have a party, come over." It's to say, "Hey, Manny, I have a flat tire. Can you please come help me? Or can you help me with something?" Because I'm more liable to get out of my house to help someone with something than if it's just to, "Hey, we're having a get together, a social outing, come out." And I'm like, "Hey, sure." I tell them I may be there, but I oftentimes they already know that, hey, they're just doing that to be kind, but I'm probably not going to be going. And so, but those are the type of things that kind of, helping others feed me spiritually, right? And because I love giving back, but what feeds me spiritually, physically, is structure, especially with having ADHD. I know that I have to be hardcore about my daily routines and structure. And the more I can create habits of doing things that are good for me that I don't have to think about, the better, right? So, for example, I'm so hardwired of waking up at 3 in the morning, whether it's vacation, whether it is I just went to sleep at 1 in the morning. Right, that if I miss a couple of days, I start getting anxiety because I am outside of what I am conditioned to be normally doing, and it's like, oh no, and I have to wake up at 3, and normally that next day I'm up before the alarm clock even rings because I'm going into my routine.
That's really interesting. So you shared the piece about anxiety. That's something that I struggle with as well. And I think the counter is you wake up intentionally at 3 a.m. I wake up unintentionally at 2 a.m. And I'm thinking about
Yes.
right? But because you've done the practice of putting those structures in place, I'm going to address that at the appropriate time, not the inappropriate time.
Well, I think that what the common misbelief that most people have when they wake up in the middle of the night with a whole sense of anxiety and issues is that if they stay in bed long enough, they're going to go back to sleep.
Yes, sir.
That is the biggest lie ever told, because all you're doing is getting angry and frustrated with your body that is now giving you energy to act, but you're trying to stay immobile. And so it's like a bad loop. And so what I like to tell people, not something that I thought figured out myself, but has been told to me, is keep a notepad, a journal. That energy needs to go somewhere, right? And your mind just went into a very active state. So you have to do something to exhaust it, because sleep happens when the merging of exhaustion of the body and exhaustion of the mind meet, and then that's when it's the easiest to go to sleep,
Okay.
right? Because I know we've all felt it, that there have been times when our mind is very active, but our body is exhausted, but we yet can't go to sleep. Or vice versa. Our mind is exhausted, but our body is full of energy, but yet we can't go to sleep. And so when that merging is when we can. So if you wake up at 3, you have your body's still tired, right?
Yeah.
But your mind is now active, because your brain is like, hey, we have these problems that we got to solve, and it's now propelling you and giving you the energy to solve it, aka anxiety. All right. And so if we start writing things out, then your brain kind of starts saying, okay, I could take my foot off the gas, because he got it. He's already working on a set of things that he can do to solve whatever's giving him anxiety. Or if you're just writing about the experience, that is also mentally exhausting, to the point where it is out of your system, so to speak. Like, you took your thoughts and you pulled them out of your brain, and now you have the capacity to be able to go back and relax and sleep.
Are there places that you're aware of where service members can get help with managing their mental wellness outside of the VA?
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Are you able to share?
yes, I would be. I'm a little biased, but we have a great counseling center here at Texas A&M-Central
We
Texas.
do. We do. It's
With
wonderful.
two great clinicians here, with Dr. Muna and her assistant director, who have they probably have forgotten more than what I know about counseling, in terms of what their experiences are, and they're here. And if you're not able to get in to see them, then alternatives here in Killeen do exist. We have Endeavors, that offers free counseling to military service members and their families.
Okay.
We also, unknown to a lot of folks, there is a vet center in Harker Heights, and it's by the VA. But the key difference is that the way they are structured intentionally is that they are disconnected from the VA. So your VA providers, or if you're seeing a counselor at the VA, cannot read what is talked about there. And so if you're afraid of, for whatever reason, what you may say there, being judged by the medical professionals at the VA, you don't have to worry about that. And so, and then, well, if you have insurance, you can see someone who takes your insurance. But our community does really good about providing like mental health help to others. But I would say most importantly, regardless if you need the help, and you're in a critical situation, it doesn't matter where you go. People are valuable, and it's important to, if you need to take a knee, to be able to have a place to take a knee. And if at any time people can go and call into the Veterans Crisis Line, 988, at any time of the day. That's manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no judgment, because every veteran is valuable.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we've talked about some mental health things, and one thing we always want to give people an opportunity is to learn about what's next, what's possible. how they can find that next mission in life. And so the things I kind of want to make sure we roll into this and include in the conversation are tips and tactics that students can use as they're transitioning from education to the workforce, but also keeping in mind that wellness aspect. Keisha, our career and professional development director at A&M-Central Texas, is here. She's going to share a little bit of her thoughts on that process.
Yes, so this conversation has been great. I've been sitting, biting my tongue, not wanting to interrupt. I resonated with a lot of what you were sharing. I do not have that military background in terms of being a service member, but I am an Army brat, and so I've been in that world for the majority of my life, working with military students as well. And so while I haven't experienced it personally, I'm definitely familiar with their struggle, especially with that transition from the military, very structured. I don't have to think about, I don't even know the things that I don't have to think about. And then you get into that civilian world and you're like, what is insurance and what, all of these things. And so I really resonated with a lot of what you were saying. And one of the last things that I wrote down that you put was it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so in terms of career, I'm constantly telling students that your career is a journey and not a destination. And so you get on the path and you're going and there's twists and turns, but it's not about a place that you're going. It's that journey is the thing. And so before we started, we were kind of talking about how A&M-Central Texas has a very diverse student population, and we are primarily non-traditional. So we do have some students that come from high school. We have early college, high school students, more traditional, where they're coming in that way. But a lot of coming back to, we have some mid-career changes, things like that. And so wanting to kind of approach the topic from the standpoint of the various viewpoints that we have. So specifically with new college graduates, so these students are, they've come through, they haven't had a lot of work experience, and they're approaching that graduation, wanting them to focus on developing those healthy working habits, being able to continue their learning, because as we continue to learn, we are expanding our knowledge and our ability to adapt to whatever we have going on. And I feel like that will impact their well-being. And then being able to foster relationships, because we all have to have that support system, right? I believe you mentioned that as well, about finding, if I wrote it down, find your community, and if you don't have one, build it. And I thought that was fantastic. I wrote that down. So for that population of students, I'm wondering, and then before I ask the question, I want to circle back and say the other thing that I resonated with was how you were talking about how you were doing certain things, but you didn't realize that they were a thing. And then getting to a point where you're able to put names to certain coping things and like that. And so for me, one of those is boundaries. And so for our new college graduates, what are some ways to set boundaries that support their career growth without compromising their personal well-being?
I think that we have to fully understand what boundaries are, because sometimes we have a misinterpretation. And in the way I define boundaries is it is a set of rules or parameters that allow for more trust and more togetherness to happen, because as you respect my boundaries, that allows me to get closer to you and trust in you more. And if you do not respect my boundaries, then there is more distance, right? I like to liken it to when we all have that family member who every time we talk to them, we hear about how we never call enough. Well, if because we hear that all the time and we don't like hearing that, well, we can kind of predict the future where that's going to go. We probably not going to call as much or reduce even more, right? But if you take that same person and no matter whether it's been 6 months or 2 days, and they're as excited as a puppy to hear from you, well, that's a reward, right? We're going to call more aptly, right, and reciprocate that feeling. And so, when navigating school, it's very important for people to do an assessment, right, and see what do they have already going on in their lives that are non-negotiables, right? For me, I have a daughter, and she is my priority, right? And so certain things that I knew that, I want to be a dad. I want to be involved in her life. So if, she had a tournament, right now she plays golf. I have, not always, but I have the flexibility to attend some of her tournaments when she goes play golf. Um, that is something that I looked for when seeking out, employment and what the culture of the company or the organization was, and building it within that structure so that I can, fulfill these important obligations to me. So when you take an assessment and figure out what are your non-negotiables, it becomes easier to state to whoever what you're willing to compromise and what you're not willing to compromise. And also understand that it's a two-way street, right? Because just because you have these boundaries, right, employers or society can choose not to deal with you. And you have to be willing in that same regard to have that give and take. Because just because you have boundaries doesn't mean that the other party, they can just say, okay, I will not deal with someone who has this particular set of boundaries, and be okay with, okay, what you are giving up in return, and maybe some reassessment if you have certain boundaries and you're not able to find an employer that respects them, then maybe it's time to, okay, reassess and see, okay, is this preventing me from attaining employment, and what changes may I need to make, whether or it is to move to a different market where those boundaries may be respected, or shifting some of those boundaries, right, so that you can attain the career that you want.
I appreciate that. The focus on assessment. I always encourage students to do that because it's so important. You can't require something of an employer if you don't know what it is that you require. And so before you're going into that interview, taking stock of, okay, what is it that I want out of this work relationship, and being able to then articulate those questions. One of the points that I always make when we're assisting students with their interview process is that it is a two-way situation. Students go into an interview and they're super nervous and it's all this pressure to perform. But what I always remind them of is that, yes, they need to evaluate if you're a good fit for that company, but you also need to evaluate if that company is a good fit for you. And so while they are preparing questions to determine that very thing, you also need to be preparing questions for that thing for yourself. So at that point in the interview where they say, do you have any questions? That's your opportunity to ask those questions that kind of speak to those boundaries that you set. And I feel like setting boundaries is easier than defending them. I feel like that's something that I definitely struggle with. Like, okay, yes, this is my boundary, but we have this deadline and this and that. And so I'm always encouraging students to think about that as well. So I appreciated the point about assessment because that's where it all starts. So moving on to our early career professionals, so they have a little bit more experience. So they've kind of set those boundaries. They're working on defending those boundaries. Again, growth, whether it's personal, professional, seeking out those opportunities to expand, incorporating personal interest because we can't always just be focused on work. We have to have that balance. And which kind of leads into my next question. So we are focusing on growing and learning, and we've got our boundaries in place that we're trying to defend. We have some personal interests. We may or may not be applying energy to those. But what are some signs that we should be keeping in mind, looking for that might indicate that there's early signs of burnout in our professional journey, and how can we address those?
Well, I think it's important to understand that in any work environment is a give and a take, right? And so we are should be evaluating what am I receiving from this employer, and what was my purpose for getting this employment, right? If it's to just get a check, and I'm going to work such and such hours, and I'm going to get paid for these hours. Okay, then what else are we missing from that equation that we can apply to as we start a new job search, right? Because these relationships are transactional, right, in nature, and we all like to be useful, but we don't like to be misused, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes, burnout happens when we have a feeling of being misused, and what happens is that sometimes that becomes a realization because we feel that this is our forever,
Sure.
right? And so if it's a bad situation and we feel like we have no way out, like this is our forever, those feelings get compounded tremendously because there is no hope, right? And so that's why it's so important to constantly assess, okay, what am I getting out of this job or career or whatever we're doing to earn money, and what's my trade-off, right? And am I still fulfilling that trade-off? And if that changes, what are the new parameters, right? And how does that apply to where I want to go? And some people are completely happy where they currently are and get fulfillment and joy, and that's never an issue. But if you had dreams, goals, and destinations that you needed to arrive to, it's still helping you accomplish those things, right? And sometimes just that reminder or thinking of hey, I am here because it is not just giving me a paycheck, but it is giving me time on my resume that I need to accomplish my next transition into XYZ or this future career. Or I am here to build relationships with this demographic. And suddenly things don't seem so dire because you just reminded yourself the reason for you being there, right? And sometimes you realize that I have accomplished what I came here to do, and other than receiving a check, there's no other reason for me to be here. There's nothing more for me to learn. And then that is when it is sometimes best to say, okay, what is still left on the table for me to pick up, and where can I pick those things up at?
Awesome. I love how your response just transitioned right into the next section. It kind of already pre-answered my next question actually, but focusing on what is the purpose. I am a firm believer in intention. I feel like we should always be doing things with intention. When I'm working with students and they're exploring their career options, I'm talking about those specific things that you mentioned. And I appreciate that both Josh and you have indicated that you had these roles where you were high wage positions, but that wasn't the thing for you. And so that is a thing that I'm telling students all the time, like, yes, we all want to make a great living and not have to worry about where our next meal is coming from. But you can't focus solely on the salary amount when you're making those decisions about what it is that you're going to do with the rest of your life. And so that's super important to think about, okay, what is the purpose? Why am I choosing to work in this place? Is it just to get a paycheck, like you said, or is it to fulfill some other thing that I'm wanting to fulfill within myself? And so I love that. So the next section, those mid-career professionals like myself, where sometimes we're just like, okay, is this where I want to be? And we do have students like that here who they say, I did this for years. A lot of military veterans,
Absolutely.
20 years. Working with a student who did 20 years in logistics. And I was like, oh my God, yes, the job market is great. I don't want to do that anymore. I have
I don't
no
wanna ever
interest.
look at another container ever again.
Hard pivot. Don't want to do that. And that's perfectly fine. But it's a different conversation than somebody who's fresh out of high school, fresh out of college. And so you're kind of like what you already talked about, reassessing, identifying that initial intention. Another point that I had is prioritizing your health. Work, you talked about work is not a good coping mechanism. I personally have never suffered from that. That's
Josh
not
have a support
honestly.
group that we attend.
Honestly, that's not true. There have been some points, but it has not been an overwhelming struggle for me for sure. But when you're at that mid-career point, you probably do have more balls up in the air that you're juggling, and so and you kind of already talked about it. But the question was going to be about finding ways to promote both professional fulfillment and personal wellness while, maintaining that balance.
Okay, so I think that is very important. Like previous said, trade-offs, right? And so, like the example that you illustrated earlier in terms of the person at 20 years in logistics, right, and then wants to make a pivot, right? If he's able to, right, transition and start in a brand new career field, then it's with the understanding that his earning potential may not be the same because someone with 20 years of logistics and poly certifications and different types of titles that correlate in that field makes a certain level of income. Would he be prepared to start a new career at a entry level start, right? Is that okay? And if it is, then go right at it. But we have to be realistic with the trade-offs that we're making in life because we can't have the same expectations of 20 years in logistics and then starting day one in a new career and being treated with the respect of 20 years of experience when you literally have day one in a brand new career.
Right.
And sometimes that kind of can get away from us, right? And for our older working professionals that are transitioning, it's very important to really understand that we have experiences that are unique to our own because we've been in the military, we traveled, we've seen things, we've done things, we've had to think our way out of complex situations. Mm-hmm. And even if they may not have a specific terminology on a resume for that thing, that we bring those qualities and those benefits to that employer, right? And to our people that are just graduating out of high school, we get to be like a sponge, right? And so I would navigate and be humble, and learn as much as you can and try as much as you can, because you don't know what you don't know and what you may have. I initially, out of high school, thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I made a plan and God laughed. And I'm now, and then thought I was going to be some big shot financial advisor. I made a plan, God laughed, and then discovered this is my purpose. And now dead set in fulfilling that. And so, and I think a lot of that revolves around the reasons why, right? Because I think that originally those first two career fields were more to feed an ego,
Sure.
right? To be somebody, to come back to the block and say, hey, I'm this, right? But this is what I do now, is to fulfill the spirit, so to speak.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. The career journey, it's a very personal thing. More so, I worked at Central Texas College for a long time. And so working with that population of students, they were more often coming directly out of high school, dealing with that situation where the parent was paying the bill. And so they felt that obligation to pursue the path that the parent. And so trying to navigate those conversations of, yes, they are controlling the purse strings, but they're not going to have to live that life. And so trying to help them to navigate those tough conversations of, this is my path. And again, it is a journey, and want to make sure that I don't leave the conversation without encouraging students to visit the Office of Career and Professional Development, because that is what our role is here at the institution, to provide that guidance, resources, services related to resumes, interview prep, things like that, especially with this population of students where that military experience is Greek and the civilian world is English, and trying to marry those two and make them make sense. And so that's what we do in my office.
Love it.
Awesome.
Love it. Are there any final thoughts?
I've given up a lot of thoughts. Great, very grateful to be here and be invited out here, and it's been a wonderful time. So thank you. So yeah, that's all.
Manny, thank you for coming and participating and engaging in a conversation. I appreciate you for being accessible and for leading in a way that provides an example for veterans from various backgrounds from this community, that it's not just about the first bump in the road or the second bump in the road, but about the path of discovery, and then using your resources along that path, whether that be education, mentoring, or professional services, to achieve your goals and realize that those expectations and outcomes. So
All in this together.
Absolutely.
Keisha, thank you so much for joining in the conversation and for your time. We appreciate a
sure.
contribution from CPD, Career Professional Development. Manny, thank you for your sacrifice and service and your time. And we look forward to sharing this with our community.
All right. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, that's it, y'all.